Hi everyone, this is Rhonda Daniels with Growing Herbs for Beginners. I'm so excited to have you here with me. I hope you learn a lot and I hope you enjoy the class. Before we get started, my apologies to anyone that finds my pronunciation of the word herbs maddening. It's just the way I learned it. I know in other parts of the world it's pronounced herbs. Either is correct depending on where you grew up. And so again, sorry if it drives you crazy. Anyway, let's jump right into Module 1. Herbs have been used long before humans kept a written record of history. Prehistoric burials have been uncovered. The bodies that were wrapped in herbs, and herbs were tossed in different flowers and things. Lots of plant materials were found. So the ancients knew and used different plants, and they learned through trial and error which plants were good to eat, unfortunately, which ones were not, which ones would make soothing teas, which ones could heal. Plant traditions like that have been carried on throughout history, and today people still use herbs for flavorings, for fragrance, medicines, and teas. The nice thing about growing your own herbs today is that you get to choose the ones you like. If you've never grown or used herbs before, you get to do some experimenting to discover which ones you'll fall in love with and which ones you can do without. There is a PDF file in the Module 1 area. If you've never grown them before or never really tasted them, it will give you a little bit of an idea of what a few of the basic, easier herbs are flavor-wise. So that may come in handy for choosing which plants you want to grow. So let's move on. What are herbs? Well, technically speaking, an herb is a plant that does not develop a woody outer structure like bark. Herbs are tender, and they generally have soft upper, or as we call them, aerial parts. There are a few exceptions. Rosemary is one that we see frequently in herb gardens. Rosemary does not have true bark, although it looks like true bark. For this reason, though, because it has this sort of hard outer structure, it doesn't like to have that cut into. Herbs have different life cycles. An annual herb lives for 1 year or a season, and that means from a tiny seed that plant will grow, develop flowers and seeds, and then it will die. Once an annual has produced seeds for future generations, its life cycle is finished. Biennials, on the other hand, live for 2 years. The first year they don't do much other than grow their leaves, sometimes in a round bunch of leaves close to the ground that we call a rosette. Not all herbs do this, but some will, not all biennials. The second year, however, they send up a flower stalk, and that flower stalk will set seeds. A favorite biennial is the hollyhock, which are gorgeous. People are always surprised, though, when the stalks don't appear the first year, and they think that they've done something wrong. Not so, just the nature of the plant. That hollyhock will have gorgeous flowers the second year. For this reason, people often sow biennial seeds every year. So with the exception of the first year, they will have flowers yearly. 1 year they'll have the rosette or basal growth, and the second year they will have the flowers. Perennials are the herbs that come back yearly. Perennials will live for several years. Sometimes they will live for many years. Most people think that dirt and soil are the same thing, but not if you know the difference. Make sure that you go through the PDF files and see what I mean. There's quite a bit of information there, and the soil is made up of much more than meets the eye. It's really important to have a little bit of soil background when you're growing things. If you've decided that you're going to grow your herbs in a garden, you may need to clear an area first. There are some directions in those PDF files for doing that, making the job a little bit easier. You may just decide to put in raised beds instead. Raised beds, not rocket science, super easy, and you don't need to do much clearing for a raised bed. You can lay down papers directly beneath the bed to block weeds or landscape fabric. Fill up the bed with your soil, and you can be ready to plant. If you're growing in containers, you'll probably need to use a bagged potting mix. Again, go through the Module 1 PDFs for potting mix information. There's a little bit more to buying a potting mix than meets the eye, and there's a few things that you do want to look for. If you want to plant your herbs in containers and are buying new pots and containers, you might have a good time shopping for pots. I actually love looking at them, and I love to visualize what plants would look good in each pot. I know, what can I say? If you don't want to buy new containers, there are tons of things you can use as planters. Just really use your imagination. An old boot or shoe can be a home for a plant. An old wheelbarrow or kid's wagon makes a great portable container for a small herb garden. Old teapots and cooking pots are great too. Whatever you use, you just need to make sure it has good drainage so you don't have water standing in it for any length of time. If you're using something metal, if it's got a few rust spots in it, terrific. If you're using an old boot or a shoe, just make sure that maybe it has a hole in it. You can poke a few holes in the bottom. You will need to be vigilant about watering when you're using containers because the soil does dry out a little bit more quickly in a container or a pot than it does in the garden. We'll have some fun later in the course. I'll show you how to plant some unusual containers. So go through those PDFs. They have a lot of information about the types of pots and qualities of each, and it's a real good idea to look through them before doing any shopping. The type of garden you end up with really depends on how much time you want to spend in the garden, the space that you have available, and what you want to do with your herbs. If you live in an apartment, you want to grow herbs, and you live in a cold climate, you will need to find some warm, well-lit growing area for those plants. If your apartment is tiny, you may also need to really limit the number of herbs to just a favorite one or two. I have a friend that keeps one aloe vera, a pot of chives, and one pot of spearmint in her kitchen window. These are her favorites. It's all she has room for. And she's happy. So on the other hand, if you have the outdoor space and you want to put in a bigger garden, you've got a few more growing options. We grow a lot. I have big patches of sage and chives and nettles and things like that we grow and we harvest. And I dry a lot and I use a lot for medicine making. So I probably go through a lot more than the average person does. But that's, what I do. That does not mean that, you can't just have one little pot and snip a few leaves now and again for a cup of tea. So your first job is to figure out where you're going to be growing and what kind of garden you think you might like to have. I will see you in Module 2.